Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
Today,
We're going to be looking at family constellations.
and the systemic thinking behind them.
You've sent us a fascinating collection of articles, research, even some personal notes on this.
It seems like you're ready to move past the surface and really understand those invisible family patterns
Right.
that shape so much of who we are.
And what's incredible is we often think of these patterns as being limited to our immediate families.
Yeah.
But the principles behind family constellations apply to all sorts of systems.
You're right.
It's not just about blood relations.
It's bigger than that. Think about your school.
Your workplace.
So,
Even your friend group.
these are all systems, and they all follow these surprisingly similar patterns.
That's right. Family constellations encourage us to zoom out and look at the entire picture.
Not just the individual pieces.
It's about understanding the web of relationships and how they interact to create the whole, which is always greater than the sum of its parts.
It's about those connections as invisible threads that link us together.
And speaking of connections,
One of the things that really jumped out at me was this idea of ancestral echoes.
it's like we're carrying around the memories and experiences of our ancestors, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Exactly, and there's a scientific basis for this.
Really?
It's not just some mystical idea.
Remember, our DNA isn't static.
Mhm.
It's constantly being influenced by our experiences in our environment.
It's like how scientists are finding that Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons had remarkably similar DNA.
Right.
The big difference.
Their experiences and how they adapted to their surroundings.
Yes.
And those adaptations got woven into their very being, passed down through generations.
Precisely, and this is where the concept of a morphic field comes in.
Think of it like a field of information,
Okay.
a kind of memory that exists within a system.
It's not just about the genes themselves, but this whole network of information that gets passed down through generations.
It reminds me of that saying, the sins of the father are visited upon the children.
Obviously, it's not about blame.
But it does highlight how those ancestral patterns can repeat themselves, often unconsciously.
Right, and that's why understanding these principles can be so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not about blaming our ancestors or feeling trapped by the past, but about bringing those hidden dynamics to light
Right.
so we can make more conscious choices.
So if these patterns are often unconscious, how do they actually show up in our lives?
One of the key concepts in the materials you sent is the orders of love.
I had to admit, when I first heard that, I thought we were diving into some steamy romance novel.
Well, it's not about romantic love in the conventional sense.
Okay.
It's actually a framework for understanding the fundamental dynamics.
That create balance and belonging within a system. And that includes families, of course.
All right, so let's unpack this. You're saying it's not really about love, but more about those fundamental principles that keep relationships healthy and functional.
Exactly. The orders of love encompass three key principles: belonging, hierarchy, and the balance of giving and taking.
Okay.
And when these orders are out of whack,
That's when things can get messy.
so it's like a recipe for healthy relationships. And when we're missing ingredients or putting things together in the wrong order, that's when problems arise.
Precisely. And these principles apply to all sorts of relationships.
Not just romantic ones. So let's start with belonging.
Okay.
This is the foundation of any healthy system. Everyone has an equal right to belong, even those we might not want to think about.
Okay, I'm already intrigued and a little apprehensive. What do you mean by those we might not want to think about?
Well, it includes those who have been excluded for any reason, past partners, those who have passed away,
Yeah.
even those who were never born.
Wow.
Family constellations teach us that excluding anyone for any reason creates an imbalance in the system.
So even if someone's been gone for generations, their absence is still felt within the family system.
Precisely. It's like an echo resonating through time.
The system will constantly try to rebalance itself. And often it does that through the living members, whether they're aware of it or not.
Wow. That's pretty profound when you think about it.
So that's belonging.
Yeah.
What about this hierarchy business?
Hierarchy is all about recognizing the natural order within a system.
Okay.
This isn't about one person being better than another.
But about acknowledging the roles and responsibilities that come with different positions within a family.
So like the difference between being the parent and being the child, or the older sibling versus the younger sibling.
Exactly. Birth order is a big one. Then there's the order in which partners enter the family. Even the order in which we've held significant roles in our life, like our jobs, can play a part.
Right.
Each of these positions carries a certain weight.
A certain energy.
And when we try to step outside of those roles or we don't acknowledge that natural order, that's when we create friction.
Precisely. It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
It's not going to work, and it's going to create a lot of unnecessary stress and tension in the process.
This is really making me think about some of the dynamics in my own family.
Okay, so we've got belonging and hierarchy. What about that third order, the balance of giving and taking?
This one is crucial.
It's about understanding that every exchange within a system has an energetic cost.
Okay.
It's not just about material things, but time, energy, emotions.
Even love. When we give, we expend energy. When we receive energy.
And it's all about maintaining a healthy flow.
So it's like a dance.
Yeah,
There needs to be a sense of reciprocity, a give and take for it to feel balanced.
exactly. And this balance or lack thereof can manifest in so many different ways. For example, the material you sent talks about the dangers of blind love.
Oh, yeah.
That's that impulse to help so much that we actually cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
It comes from a good place, of course.
But it disrupts that natural equilibrium.
It's like the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Precisely. Good intentions without an awareness of these systemic principles can backfire.
Sometimes with significant consequences.
Oh, right.
And often those consequences show up as recurring conflicts, emotional distress,
Yeah.
even physical ailments.
Okay, so we're seeing how these seemingly abstract principles can actually play out in very real, tangible ways in our lives.
Right.
This is already giving me so much to think about.
And we're just scratching the surface.
There's so much more to uncover.
Welcome back.
Before the break, we were talking about the orders of love. Belonging, hierarchy, balance.
Now, there was another concept in the materials you shared that really piqued my interest.
Conscience.
Ah, yes. This is where things get really interesting.
See, when we talk about conscience in the context of family constellations,
Okay.
we're not talking about the conventional moral compass.
The right versus wrong kind of thing.
So it's not about judging our actions based on some external code of ethics.
Exactly. In this context, conscience is more about what allows us to belong to our family system.
Okay.
So it's almost like we have this internal rule book
That's a great way to put it.
that's been passed down through generations, telling us how to behave in order to fit in and be loved.
And what's fascinating is that this rule book often operates on an unconscious level. We're not even aware of the forces that are shaping our choices and behaviors.
Okay, so if our conscience is, at least in part, shaped by these invisible family dynamics,
Yeah.
how does that impact our ability to make choices that are truly aligned with our own values and desires? What happens when those things are in conflict?
That's the million-dollar question.
And it's at the heart of what makes family constellations so powerful
yeah.
and often so challenging.
You see, sometimes our individual conscience,
Okay.
that sense of what feels true and right for us personally, can be at odds with our family's unconscious conscience.
I see.
Those unspoken rules and expectations that have been passed down through the generations.
That makes so much sense. It explains why we sometimes do things that we know at an intellectual level are good for us, but they leave us feeling incredibly guilty or uneasy.
It's like we're betraying some invisible loyalty.
Yeah.
Precisely. And those feelings are very real and valid.
It's important to honor them. It's
Yeah.
like our system is telling us that something is not quite aligned.
Yeah.
And that tension.
That inner conflict is something we need to pay attention to.
So it's not about judging ourselves or trying to suppress those feelings of guilt or discomfort, but about understanding where they're coming from.
Exactly. It's about bringing awareness to those hidden dynamics so we can make more conscious choices.
Right.
And that leads us to another important aspect of this work.
Taking responsibility for our own lives.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean blaming ourselves for everything that's happened to us. It's not about that.
So if it's not about blame, then what does it look like to take responsibility within this context?
The materials you shared emphasized acknowledging where we received life from. Our parents, and this doesn't mean we have to like everything about them.
Or condone their choices.
It's about recognizing the reality of our origin, regardless of whether it was a happy or traumatic one.
Yes. It's about saying, this is how it was. This is where I came from.
And that simple act of acknowledging the reality of our beginnings can be incredibly powerful.
Right.
It allows us to step out of the victim-perpetrator dynamic and into a place of personal power.
It's like we're taking back our own narrative, not by erasing the past, but by acknowledging it and choosing how we want to move forward.
But how does all of this relate to those ancestral patterns we talked about earlier?
If those patterns are so deeply embedded in our family systems, how can we possibly break free?
That's where things get really interesting,
Yeah.
and where the idea of individual agency comes into play.
You see, it's not about changing our ancestors or wishing things had been different.
Right.
That's impossible. Instead, it's about understanding how those patterns are still operating in our lives and making conscious choices to interrupt them.
So it's like we're becoming aware of the unconscious script that we've inherited and choosing to write our own ending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that process can be challenging.
It often brings us face to face with deeply ingrained beliefs and behaviors, but it's also incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming our own power and creating a life that's more aligned with our deepest values and aspirations.
And sometimes that journey involves addressing the impact of unresolved trauma.
That's a heavy topic. It feels like trauma, whether it happened to us directly or was passed down through generations, can cast a long shadow.
You're absolutely right.
Trauma often leaves its mark on a family system, and those wounds can be passed down through generations.
Right.
Sometimes manifesting as emotional distress, unhealthy relationship patterns,
Yeah.
and even physical ailments.
So you're saying that those aches and pains we experience might be pointing to something deeper, something unresolved within our family system?
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is radical.
Yeah.
And while we need to be careful about drawing direct lines between specific symptoms and systemic issues,
Right.
it's important to be open to exploring those connections.
You're right. It's not about self-diagnosing, but it does open up a whole new way of looking at health and healing.
Now, the materials you shared did mention some specific examples of how these imbalances might manifest physically.
For instance, they talked about how chronic headaches can sometimes be linked to a lack of love or acceptance for someone in the family system.
Yes, and it's important to remember that this isn't about blaming ourselves or others.
Okay.
It's simply about recognizing that our bodies might be trying to communicate something,
Right?
to bring our attention to something that needs healing. And sometimes those messages come in the form of physical or emotional discomfort.
It's like our bodies are trying to get our attention to say, hey, something's not right here. Let's take a closer look.
Exactly. It's about tuning in and listening to what our bodies and emotions are trying to tell us.
And often those messages are pointing us towards deeper patterns and unresolved issues that are ripe for healing.
This is giving me a lot to think about.
So if our physical and emotional well-being can be influenced by these systemic patterns, what about bigger life events like illness and death? How do those fit into this picture?
That's a profound question.
And the materials you sent offer some intriguing insights into this aspect of family constellations.
They suggest that even in those challenging moments,
Okay.
there's an order.
A deeper meaning that we can tap into.
So even in the face of suffering and loss, there's an opportunity for growth and transformation.
Precisely. Now, it's crucial to approach this with sensitivity and respect.
We would never want to minimize the pain of loss or suggest that anyone is to blame for their suffering.
Right.
However,
From a systemic perspective, illness and death can sometimes be seen as a way for a family system to rebalance itself.
that's a powerful and perhaps unsettling idea. Can you elaborate on that?
Imagine a family system as a mobile.
Okay.
When one element is out of balance, it affects the entire structure.
Right.
Sometimes those imbalances can be resolved through personal growth, shifts in relationships,
Or increased awareness. However, other times the system might seek a more dramatic recalibration.
and this is where illness or death can come into play.
So you're saying that these events, as difficult as they are to comprehend, might serve a purpose within the larger family system.
That's one way to look at it. Now it's essential to approach this idea with caution.
It's never about blaming anyone for illness or death.
Instead, it's about approaching those experiences with a sense of curiosity.
Compassion and a willingness to look beyond the surface.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly insightful. It's like you're saying that even in the darkest of times, there's a deeper order at play, a wisdom that we can tap into if we're willing to listen.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of taking responsibility for our own lives.
Our own healing and finding ways to support the well-being of our families and future generations.
This has been an incredible journey so far.
And we're back. You know, it's not every day we get to explore such a complex and thought-provoking topic.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, that's for sure.
And you're right, family constellations can be challenging.
But they can also be incredibly illuminating.
It's like someone's handed us a map to navigate those hidden landscapes within ourselves and our families.
Landscapes that until now we may have only glimpsed in our dreams or felt as those unexplained tensions at family gatherings.
And just like any good map, family constellations provide us with valuable information.
But they don't dictate our every move. We still have the freedom to choose our own path.
That's such an important point. It's easy to feel overwhelmed or even fatalistic when we start to uncover these deep-seated patterns.
But it's crucial to remember that we're not prisoners of our past.
Exactly. Awareness doesn't equal imprisonment.
In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Okay.
Awareness is the first step towards freedom.
Freedom from those unconscious patterns that have been keeping us stuck.
So if we're not meant to simply uncover these patterns and then resign ourselves to a predetermined fate, what are we supposed to do with this newfound knowledge?
What does it look like to take responsibility for our place within the system while also forging our own path?
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
And it's where things get really exciting.
Because it's where we move from understanding to action.
Okay.
You see, Family Constellations invites us to become active participants in our own lives.
And in the evolution of our families.
We begin to see that we have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
We can perpetuate the patterns of the past, or we can consciously create something new.
So it's not just about understanding where we came from, but about actively shaping where we're going.
Precisely.
It's about stepping into our own power and making choices that are aligned with our deepest values and aspirations.
And sometimes that means making difficult decisions, setting boundaries, having tough conversations, or even creating some distance from unhealthy dynamics.
That takes courage. It can feel daunting to challenge those deeply ingrained family patterns.
It can be challenging for sure.
But it's also incredibly empowering.
Okay.
And we don't have to do it alone.
There are trained facilitators, therapists, and practitioners who can support us on this journey.
That's reassuring. So where do we even begin?
If someone is listening to this, feeling both intrigued and a bit overwhelmed, what's the first step they can take?
The first step is simply to cultivate awareness. Start paying attention to the patterns in your own life, in your relationships and in your family dynamics.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what patterns do I see repeating themselves? Where do I feel stuck or limited?
What are the unspoken rules that govern my family?
Wow.
These are powerful questions that can unlock a deeper understanding of yourself and your place within your family system.
It's like we're becoming detectives in our own lives, searching for clues that can help us understand the forces that have shaped us.
And as we uncover these clues, we begin to see ourselves and our families with more compassion and understanding.
Right. We realize that everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they have.
And from that place of compassion, we can start to make different choices.
Choices that honor our ancestors while also creating a more fulfilling and authentic life for ourselves and future generations.
That's beautifully said.
And it highlights the true power of family constellations. It's not about blame or judgment.
It's about healing, growth, and creating a more harmonious and loving future for ourselves and our families.
This has been an incredibly powerful and insightful deep dive. Thank you for guiding us through this exploration.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, we all carry the wisdom of our ancestors within us.
By tapping into that wisdom and making conscious choices, we can create a brighter future for ourselves and for generations to come. And to you, our listener, thank you for sharing your curiosity and embarking on this journey with us. Keep asking those tough questions, keep seeking answers, and keep those ancestral echoes alive in a way that honors your own unique path.
We'll see you on our next deep dive.